New England is a region which comprises 6 states of the Northeastern United States: Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. It is bordered by New York to the west, Long Island Sound to the south, the Atlantic Ocean and the Canadian province of New Brunswick to the east, and the Canadian province of Quebec to the north. 10 years later, the Puritans settled north of Plymouth Colony in Boston, thus forming Massachusetts Bay Colony. Over the next 126 years, New England fought in 4 French and Indian Wars, until the British and their Iroquois Confederacy allies defeated the French and their Algonquin allies in North America. In the late 18th century, the New England colonies initiated the resistance to the British Parliament's efforts to impose new taxes without the consent of the colonists. The Boston Tea Party was a protest to which Great Britain responded with a series of punitive laws stripping Massachusetts of self-government, which were termed the Intolerable Acts by the colonists. The confrontation led to open warfare in 1775, the expulsion of the British authorities from New England in spring 1776, and the Declaration of Independence in July 1776. Some of the first movements of American literature, philosophy, and education originated in New England. The region played a prominent role in the movement to abolish slavery, and was the first region of the United States transformed by the Industrial Revolution. Today, New England is a major world center of education, high technology, insurance, and medicine. Boston is its cultural, financial, educational, medical, and transportation center. Each state is principally subdivided into small incorporated municipalities known as towns, which are often governed by town meetings. The only unincorporated area in New England exists in the sparse, northern regions of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Since 1970, voters have more often supported liberal candidates at the state and federal level than those of any other region in the United States. New England is one of the United States Census Bureau's 9 regional divisions and the only multi-state region with clear, consistent boundaries. It maintains a strong sense of cultural identity, although the terms of this identity are often contested, combining Puritanism with liberalism, agrarian life with industry, and isolation with immigration. History. Eastern Algonquin peoples. The earliest known inhabitants of New England were American Indians who spoke a variety of the Eastern Algonquin languages. Prominent tribes included the Abenaki, Mi'kmaq, Penobscot, Pequot, Mohegans, Narragansett Indians, Pocumtuck, and Wampanoag. Their principal town was Norridgewock, in present-day Maine. The Penobscot lived along the Penobscot River in Maine. The Wampanoag occupied southeastern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. The Pocumtucks lived in western Massachusetts, and the Mohegan and Pequot tribes in the Connecticut region. The Connecticut River Valley, which includes parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts and Connecticut, linked different indigenous communities culturally, linguistically, and politically. As early as 1600, French, Dutch, and English traders, exploring the New World, began to trade metal, glass, and cloth for local beaver pelts. Colonial period. The Virginia Companies. On April 10, 1606, King James I of England issued a charter for each of the Virginia Companies, London and Plymouth. These were privately funded ventures, intended to claim land for England, conduct trade, and return a profit. In 1620, Plymouth in present-day Massachusetts was settled by pilgrims from the Mayflower, beginning the history of permanent European settlement in New England. Plymouth Council for New England. In 1616, English explorer John Smith named the region New England. The name was officially sanctioned on November 3, 1620. when the charter of the Virginia Company of Plymouth was replaced by a royal charter for the Plymouth Council for New England, a joint stock company established to colonize and govern the region. As the first colonists arrived in Plymouth, they wrote and signed the Mayflower Compact, their first governing document. The Massachusetts Bay Colony came to dominate the area and was established by royal charter in 1629 with its major town and port of Boston. Established in 1630, Massachusetts Puritans began to settle in Connecticut as early as 1633. Roger Williams was banished from Massachusetts for heresy, led a group south, and founded Providence in the area that became the state of Rhode Island in 1636. At this time, Vermont was yet unsettled, and the territories of New Hampshire and Maine were claimed and governed by Massachusetts. French and Indian Wars. Relationships between colonists and Native Americans alternated between peace and armed skirmishes, the bloodiest of which was the Pequot War in 1637, which resulted in the Mystic Massacre. On May 19, 1643, the colonies of Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, New Haven, and Connecticut joined together in a loose compact called the New England Confederation. The Confederation was designed largely to coordinate mutual defense, and gained some importance during King Philip's War, from June 1675 through April 1678. King Philip's War pitted the colonists and the Native American allies against a widespread Native American uprising, resulting in killings and massacres on both sides. During the next 74 years, there were 6 colonial wars that took place primarily between New England and New France. Throughout these wars, New England was allied with the Iroquois Confederacy and New France was allied with the Wabanaki Confederacy. After the New England conquest of Acadia in 1710, mainland Nova Scotia was under the control of New England. But both present-day New Brunswick and virtually all of present-day Maine remained contested territory between New England and New France. After the British won the war in 1763, the Connecticut River Valley was opened for British settlement into western New Hampshire and what is today Vermont. The New England colonies were settled largely by farmers, who became relatively self-sufficient. Later, aided by the Puritan work ethic, New England's economy began to focus on crafts and trade, in contrast to the southern colonies, which focused on agricultural production while importing finished goods from England. Dominion of New England. By 1686, King James II had become concerned about the increasingly independent ways of the colonies, including their self-governing charters, their open flouting of the Navigation Acts, and their growing military power. He therefore established the Dominion of New England, an administrative union comprising all of the New England colonies. In 1688, the former Dutch colonies of New York, East New Jersey, and West New Jersey were added to the Dominion. The Union, imposed from the outside and contrary to the rooted democratic tradition of the region, was highly unpopular among the colonists. The Dominion significantly modified the charters of the colonies, including the appointment of royal governors to nearly all of them. There was an uneasy tension between the royal governors, their officers, and the elected governing bodies of the colonies. The governors wanted unlimited authority, and the different layers of locally elected officials would often resist them. In most cases, the local town governments continued operating as self-governing bodies, just as they had before the appointment of the governors. After the Glorious Revolution in 1689, Bostonians overthrew the royal governor, Sir Edmund Andros. They seized Dominion officials and adherents to the Church of England during a popular and bloodless uprising. These tensions eventually culminated in the American Revolution, boiling over with the outbreak of the War of American Independence in 1775. The first battles of the war were fought in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, later leading to the siege of Boston by Continental troops. In March 1776, British forces were compelled to retreat from Boston, New England in the new nation post-revolutionary New England. After the War of Independence, New England ceased to be a meaningful political unit, but remained a defined cultural region consisting of its now sovereign constituent states. By 1784, all of the states in the region had taken steps towards the abolition of slavery, with Vermont and Massachusetts introducing total abolition in 1777 and 1783, respectively. The nickname Yankeeland was sometimes used to denote the New England area, especially among Southerners and British. After settling a dispute with New York, Vermont was admitted to statehood in 1791, formally completing the defined area of New England. On March 15, 1820, as part of the Missouri Compromise, the territory of Maine, formerly a part of Massachusetts, was admitted to the Union as a free state. Today, New England is defined as made up of the 6 states of Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. For the rest of the period before the American Civil War, New England remained distinct from the rest of the United States. New England's economic growth relied heavily on trade with the British Empire, and the region's merchants and politicians strongly opposed trade restrictions. As the United States and the United Kingdom fought the War of 1812, New England Federalists organized the Hartford Convention in the winter of 1814 to discuss the region's grievances concerning the war, and proposed changes to the Constitution to protect the region's interests and maintain its political power. Radical delegates within the convention proposed the region's secession from the United States, but were outnumbered by moderates who opposed the idea. Politically, the region often disagreed with the rest of the country. Massachusetts and Connecticut were among the last refuges of the Federalist Party, and, when the second party system began in the 1830s, New England became the strongest bastion of the new Whig Party. The Whigs were usually dominant throughout New England, except in the more democratic Maine and New Hampshire. Leading statesmen, including Daniel Webster, hailed from the region. New England was distinct in other ways. Many notable literary and intellectual figures produced by the United States before the American Civil War were New Englanders, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, John Greenleaf Whittier, George Bancroft, and William H. Prescott. Industrial Revolution. New England was key to the Industrial Revolution in the U.S. The Blackstone Valley, running through Massachusetts and Rhode Island, has been called the birthplace of America's Industrial Revolution. In 1787, the first cotton mill in America, the Beverly Cotton Manufactory, was founded in the North Shore seaport of Beverly, Massachusetts. The manufactory was also considered the largest cotton mill of its time. Technological developments and achievements from the manufactory led to the development of more advanced cotton mills, including Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Towns such as Lawrence and Lowell in Massachusetts, Woonsocket in Rhode Island, and Lewiston in Maine became centers of the textile industry following the innovations at Slater Mill and the Beverly Cotton Manufactory. The Connecticut River Valley, and in particular the Springfield Armory, became a crucible for industrial innovation, pioneering such advances as interchangeable parts and the assembly line, which influenced manufacturing processes all around the world. From early in the 19th century until the mid-20th, the region surrounding Springfield and Hartford served as the United States' epicenter for precision manufacturing, drawing skilled workers from all over the world. The rapid growth of textile manufacturing in New England between 1815 and 1860 caused a shortage of workers. Recruiters were hired by mill agents to bring young women and children from the countryside to work in the factories. Between 1830 and 1860, thousands of farm girls, such as the famous Lowell Mill girls, moved from rural areas where there was no paid employment to work in the nearby mills. As the textile industry grew, immigration also grew. By the 1850s, immigrants, especially Irish and French Canadians, began working in the mills. New England was, as a whole, the most industrialized part of the young United States. By 1850, it accounted for well over a quarter of all manufacturing value in the country, and over a third of its industrial workforce. It was also the most literate and most educated region in the country. Anti-slavery during the same period. New England and areas settled by New Englanders were the center of the strongest abolitionist and anti-slavery movements in the United States. Coinciding with the Protestant Great Awakening in the region, abolitionists who demanded immediate emancipation such as William Lloyd Garrison, John Greenleaf Whittier and Wendell Phillips had their base in the region. So too did anti-slavery politicians who wanted to limit the growth of slavery, such as John Quincy Adams, Charles Sumner, and John P. Hale. When the anti-slavery Republican Party was formed in the 1850s, all of New England, including areas that had previously been strongholds for both the Whig and the Democratic parties, became strongly Republican. New England remained solidly Republican until Catholics began to mobilize behind the Democrats, especially in 1928, and up until the Republican Party realigned its politics in a shift known as the Southern Strategy, an abrupt pivot towards broad opposition to civil rights legislation and racial integration. This led to the end of Yankee republicanism, and began New England's relatively swift transition into a consistently Democratic stronghold. 20th century and beyond, the flow of immigrants continued at a steady pace from the 1840s until cut off by World War I. The largest numbers came from Ireland and Britain before 1890, and after that from Quebec, Italy and southern Europe. The immigrants filled the ranks of factory workers, craftsmen and unskilled laborers. The Irish assumed a larger and larger role in the Democratic parts in the cities and statewide, while the rural areas remained Republican. Yankees left the farms, which never were highly productive. Many headed west, while others became professionals and businessmen in the New England cities. Great Depression. The Great Depression in the United States of the 1930s hit the region hard, with high unemployment in the industrial cities. The Democrats appealed to factory workers and especially Catholics, pulling them into the New Deal coalition and making the once Republican region into one that was closely divided. However, the enormous spending on munitions, ships, electronics, and uniforms during World War II caused a burst of prosperity in every sector. The industrialization. The region lost most of its factories, starting with the loss of textiles starting in the 1930s and getting worse after 1960. The New England economy was radically transformed after World War II. The factory economy practically disappeared. The textile mills one by one went out of business from the 1920s to the 1970s. For example, the Crompton Company, after 178 years in business, went bankrupt in 1984, costing the jobs of 2,450 workers in 5 states. The major reasons were cheap imports, the strong dollar, declining exports, and a failure to diversify. Shoes followed. What remains is very high-technology manufacturing, such as jet engines, nuclear submarines, pharmaceuticals, robotics, scientific instruments, and medical devices. It invented the format for university-industry relations in high-tech fields, and spawned many software and hardware firms, some of which grew rapidly. By the 21st century, the region had become famous for its leadership roles in the fields of education, medicine and medical research, high technology, finance, and tourism. Some industrial areas were slow in adjusting to the new service economy. In 2000, New England had 2 of the 10 poorest cities in the U.S., the state capitals of Providence, Rhode Island and Hartford, Connecticut. They were no longer in the bottom 10 by 2010. Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire remain among the 10 wealthiest states in the United States in terms of median household income and per capita income.